Chapter 1. The First Corpse. Have you ever felt the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, but strangles? That's where it begins. Long before the first scream, before the first carcass was found, before the first mother whispered prayers into the night, it had already begun. You just didn't know it. This is not a story about a monster. It's a story about what happens to people when fear takes root. When something ancient wakes up beneath the soil, hungry and forgotten. It's about the creeping dread that follows you into your dreams, the whispers that rise with the wind, and the things we dismiss until it's far too late. São Vicente was not a town of headlines or noise. It was the kind of place the world had long stopped looking at. Dusty roads, cracked land, a church that rang its bell once a week, if the priest remembered. A place where people lived quietly and died quietly until the night it didn't die quietly anymore. Until the night the goats screamed. This is Chapter 1. This is the first corpse. It began with the silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence that falls over a town as dusk settles and crickets begin their nightly song. No. This silence was thick, heavy, pregnant with something ancient, something watching. In the remote village of São Vicente, nestled in the cracked hills of Brazil's northeast, the air had turned sour. The ground seemed to pulse faintly underfoot. The wind no longer sang through the sugarcane fields. It whispered, muttered. Something had arrived, and it had come hungry. On the outskirts of the village, where the cracked red earth bled into tangled brush, an old farmer named Seu Raimundo lived in a small lopsided house. The roof sagged like a tired spine, the door creaked with every breeze. And the goats, his pride, rested in a pen just a few feet from his bedroom window. That night, Raimundo couldn't sleep. His bones ached with a deeper kind of cold than the wind could bring. He stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the slow metallic ticks of the crooked wall clock. Tick, tick, tick. Then the goats began to stir, not bleating, not yet, just movement. Soft shuffles. Then a stillness even deeper than before. Raimundo sat up, hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight at his bedside. His fingers trembled around it. He hadn't heard a dog bark, hadn't heard a branch break. But something was wrong. He knew it in his gut, the way only old men who've buried more friends than they can name do. He rose, stepped outside, barefoot on cold tile, and pointed the flashlight into the dark. The beam flickered, then caught. Eyes, low to the ground. Not glowing like a cat's, not wide like a dog's, red motionless, staring back. Raimundo didn't call out. He didn't move. The flashlight trembled in his grip. The air thickened, as if the earth itself held its breath. The eyes blinked, and then gone. The pen was silent. Too silent. When Raimundo approached it, he could already smell the blood. Thick, metallic, unnatural. The first goat lay sprawled near the fence, eyes wide open, a thin trickle of red leaking from its mouth. Its neck bore 2 perfect holes, no tearing, no mess, just holes. Another goat was splayed across the hay, limbs stiff, eyes rolled back. Same marks, same silence. There were no tracks, no signs of a struggle, just death. Precise, clean, hungry. Raimundo dropped to his knees, the flashlight falling from his hand and spinning wildly on the dirt, casting long, twisted shadows on the wooden posts. He whispered a prayer, but even that seemed to fall dead in the air. Behind him in the far brush, something rustled, then silence again. He did not turn. He did not sleep, and by dawn, the story had begun to spread. In the center of the village, next to the crumbling chapel where vines grew into the cracks of old saints carved in stone, Dona Lena was already sweeping her front step when Raimundo arrived. He was pale. His hands shook. And when he spoke, his voice cracked with something older than fear. "They're dead," he said. "Who?" she asked. "The goats. Something killed them. Not like a dog. Not like anything I've seen." She stopped sweeping. Her eyes narrowed. "No tracks," he added. "Just blood. And 2 holes. Right here." He pointed to the base of his neck. "Like needles." Donna Lena's broom fell from her fingers, and for the first time in 20 years, the bells of São Vicente rang without a wedding, a birth, or a funeral. They rang for a warning. By mid-morning, the town square buzzed with murmurs. Farmers abandoned fields, housewives left stoves burning. Even the children, normally shouting and chasing one another, stood still near the fountain, sensing something had shifted. Father Mario, the aging priest with a bad hip and worse memory, emerged from the chapel. His white cassock fluttered in the dusty breeze as he made his way to the square. He found Raimundo sitting on the stone steps, face pale as death. "Tell me," the priest said. Raimundo did, slowly, haltingly. Every word chipped away at the calm of the listeners. "They were drained," he said. "Drained?" someone asked. "Not bitten, not chewed, just emptied." A silence settled over the group, the kind that waits for someone brave or foolish enough to break it. Then came the whisper, "Chupacabra." It wasn't loud, but it spread like wildfire. Someone laughed nervously. "That's just a story, a myth." "My cousin in Pernambuco said the same thing," said a woman in a headscarf. "Then his chickens turned up dead, then his dogs. Then he found claw marks on his door." "Stories," another man said too quickly, but no one laughed again. A fog began to roll in from the hills that afternoon, slow and deliberate, as if drawn by the murmurs in the town square. It curled around the chapel, softened the edges of the homes, and swallowed the distant fence lines. The sunlight turned weak and golden, filtered through the haze, casting everything in an uneasy stillness. Father Mario stood with his hands folded behind his back, staring toward the direction of Raimundo's farm. He said nothing, but his lips moved silently. Prayers. Beside him, Donna Lena tightened her shawl and crossed herself. "I told you," she whispered. "I told you it would come back." A boy tugged at her skirt. Isadora's younger brother, Paulo. "What's a chupacabra, Donna Lena?" She didn't answer him, just bent down, brushed his hair from his face and whispered something in his ear. His eyes grew wide. He stepped back, then ran. Isadora saw it all from her window. She didn't believe in monsters. Not yet. But she believed in the look on her brother's face. And that night, it would come for her too. The house was quiet after supper. Her father, Miguel, sat near the window smoking his pipe, the same way he had every night since Isadora was born. Her mother, Roseli, hummed softly in the kitchen, scrubbing the same plate over and over without realizing it. The fog pressed against the glass, like a breath. Isadora sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching in her worn notebook, goats, hills, the chapel bell. But her eyes kept drifting to the window. The goats weren't bleating, not even once. Their pen was visible just beyond the back door, marked by a crooked fence and the soft, rustling tarp her father had strung to cover the trough. Too quiet, too still. She rose. "Where are you going?" Miguel asked, not looking up. "Just to check on them," she said. "It's late. I'll be quick." He nodded, distracted by the haze curling up the pane. She slipped outside barefoot, her sandals forgotten by the door. The ground was cold, damp. The fog clung to her like fingers. As she approached the pen, the hairs on her arms rose. The goats were huddled at the far end, pressed so tightly together they looked like one trembling, multi-legged creature. Their eyes glinted wide in the flashlight beam. She slowed her steps. "Lola," she whispered, calling the name of the friendliest. One, no response, just a trembling bleat. Then a creak. Not from the fence, from the shadows behind the well. Isadora froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Another creak, then a soft thud, like something heavy placing a foot on moist earth. She turned the flashlight toward the sound. It clicked. Dead. Her breath quickened. Her fingers felt numb. Something moved. Fast. From the well to the back corner of the pen, a blur in the mist. She didn't scream. Couldn't. Just ran. The back door slammed against the wall. As she burst through it, panting, pale, her mother dropped the plate. It shattered on the tile. Her father rose. "What happened?" "There's something behind the well." Miguel grabbed the lantern and shotgun. "Stay inside," he said, his voice firm. He didn't return for almost an hour. When he did, he was sweating, pale. The lantern flickered in his hand. "There's nothing there," he said, but his eyes didn't meet theirs. And that night, 2 of the goats were dead. No blood, no noise, just gone, with holes in their necks, and tracks this time, small, clawed, and walking upright. In the days that followed, the village of São Vicente changed. Children stopped playing outside. Doors that once stayed open until dusk were bolted shut by noon. The market stalls grew quieter. People spoke in whispers. Fear spread like mold, slow, unseen, but suffocating. Raimundo stopped tending his field. Miguel cleaned his shotgun twice a day. Father Mario, for the first time in decades, began locking the church. And Isadora, she watched. She watched the sky turn red too early in the evening. She watched her neighbors peek through curtains like prisoners. She watched her own father lose sleep and her mother murmur prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. Each morning, more animals were found dead, always the same. 2 holes, no blood. And each time the tracks were getting closer, closer to the houses, closer to the people, until finally it wasn't an animal they found. It was Paulo's dog. Dead, still warm. Its fur was matted with saliva and something darker. Its eyes wide, its body stiff, and on its neck 2 perfect holes. Isadora knelt beside it, numb. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. But something inside her broke. Because the tracks this time, they led straight to her window, and they didn't turn back. That night the dreams came. Isadora tossed beneath her thin blanket, her forehead beaded with sweat. Outside, the wind pressed against the window like a whispering mouth. In her dream, she stood alone in the sugarcane fields. The stalks were tall, taller than they'd ever been. They moved without wind, brushed her arms, tugged at her clothes. Something moved within them, a shape, low to the ground, but fast, so fast. She turned and ran, but the stalks tangled around her feet, tripping her. The sky was a deep, bruised red. The sun was gone. The moon hung above her, cracked and bleeding light. She fell. When she looked up, it was there. The creature, a blur of limbs and bone. Eyes like coals, skin stretched too tight. Its mouth opened, long, narrow, filled with teeth that didn't look. Like they belonged to anything alive, it leaned in and whispered her name, Isadora. She woke with a scream lodged in her throat, but no sound came out, only breath, heavy, ragged. Her window was open, and the curtains were moving inward. The next morning, the village was silent. Even the birds, usually chattering and fluttering through. The treetops were gone. Isadora sat at the breakfast table, untouched bread in front of her. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, on the small trail of dirt that led from the window to the hall. No one else seemed to notice it. Her mother asked if she'd had a bad dream. She nodded, but it hadn't been a dream. Not all of it. She knew what she had seen or felt. The open window, the cold breath on her cheek, the rustle that wasn't the wind. It had been there, and it had spoken her name. That afternoon, 3 men from the village, Miguel, Raimundo, and Elias the butcher, decided to form a patrol. They would sweep the outskirts, check the hills, leave offerings of salt and oil on the fence posts, like the old stories said. Donna Elena handed them a crucifix wrapped in red ribbon. "Don't speak to it," she warned. "If you see it, don't speak." Raimundo looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. They left before sunset, each man carrying a lantern, a blade, and a bottle of cachaça for courage. Isadora watched them go from the porch. The sun dipped low. The wind picked up, and then the first scream came. Short, high, cut off. The lanterns didn't come back. Not that night. Not ever. Only Raimundo returned. At dawn. Alone. His clothes were torn, his eyes bloodshot, his lips cracked and dry. He didn't speak, just dropped the empty bottle of cachaça at the chapel steps and collapsed there. When they lifted his shirt, they found claw marks, not like a dog's, not like anything they knew. 3 lines, parallel, deep, burned into him. The priest said nothing, just carried Raimundo inside and locked the door behind them. Later that day, the villagers found Miguel's blade in the field, bent in half, still warm, and near it, something else. A patch of scorched earth. In the center, a single hoofprint. But it wasn't from a goat. It was too long, too deep, and it glowed faintly in the fading light. Isadora didn't sleep that night. No one did. Because now, it wasn't just killing to feed. It was playing, and it was getting closer. The village elders called an emergency meeting. They gathered inside the chapel, behind closed doors and thick stone walls. 12 men and women, most of them gray-haired and stooped, carrying the weight of too many secrets and too many buried friends. They spoke in low voices, arguing in hushed tones. "We have to leave," one said. "There's nowhere to go," another answered. "It follows." Father Mario stood at the altar, silent, holding a yellowed book bound in leather. Not a Bible. Older. When the arguing stopped, he opened it. The room fell still. He read aloud a single phrase in a language few recognized. Then he said, "It's not the first time." Donna Elena nodded solemnly. "I remember. I was a child. Same patterns, same silence, same blood." One of the men shivered. "But that was decades ago. It wasn't supposed to come back." "It never left," the priest said. At that moment the candles flickered, every single one, and one by one they extinguished themselves. Outside, Isadora sat under the fig tree, sketching again, but this time her hands trembled. She wasn't drawing goats or bell towers. She was drawing eyes, dozens of them, black, deep, and staring. Paolo came up behind her and froze when he saw the pages. "What is that?" he asked. She looked up slowly. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think it lives in the ground." He didn't ask her how she knew, because just then they both heard it. A low sound, not a growl, not a whisper, a breath, drawn from beneath the earth, and something, somewhere just beneath the roots, shifted. That night, the dreams came again, not just to Isadora, to everyone. Old men woke screaming. Children cried out for mothers who couldn't soothe them. Rosalie, Isadora's mother, tore the blankets from her bed and shouted the name of a sister who had died 20 years ago. Even Father Mario, alone in the chapel, clutched his rosary so tightly the beads cut into his palm. The dreams were different for each of them, but they all shared one thing: a cave, dark, wet, endless, and from within it, the same whispering breath and eyes. Dozens of them, watching, waiting. Isadora's dream ended with a door, wooden, rotted, hanging by one hinge. On the other side, something moved. She reached out to touch it, and awoke with dirt beneath her fingernails. Real dirt under her nails. In her bed. She didn't tell her parents. She just scraped her hands clean in the basin, staring at her reflection. The face in the mirror looked older, paler, not entirely her own. Later that day, a boy went missing, 8 years old, gone from his bed without a sound. The window open, the sheets still warm. The villagers searched until dark. But all they found were 2 small footprints leading into the trees, and beside them another set, clawed, twice the size and far too deep. That night, the whispers came back, not in dreams, in the walls, in the rafters, in the wind. Isadora, Isadora. Always the same voice, always closer than before. She sat awake, eyes wide, waiting for the morning light. But dawn never came. The sun rose blood red, and the air smelled like copper. Outside, every rooster in São Vicente was silent. Except one. And it crowed with a broken, choking rasp, as if something were squeezing its throat while it tried to cry out. That was the day the village stopped pretending. No one opened their stores. The school remained closed. The chapel doors stayed locked, and families began to pack, not openly, not in a rush, quietly. A blanket here, a satchel there, candles, bottled water, bread, salt, and holy symbols, drawn in chalk over doorways, etched into windows, whispered in prayer. But some, like Isadora's family, stayed, not because they weren't afraid, but because they had nowhere else to go. Miguel sat at the edge of the bed, cleaning his shotgun again. Rosalie had stopped humming. Even the air inside the house seemed afraid to move. And Isadora, she no longer drew. She just sat, staring at the window, waiting. The priest rang the bell once at noon, just once, no mass, no sermon, just a toll to remind them they were still alive. For now. Then, just before sunset, a scream tore through the village. Not fear, agony. Miguel and 2 neighbors ran toward the sound. Near the edge of town, they found Marilda, an elderly woman who lived alone, collapsed. On her porch, her hands were covered in blood, her mouth open wide in a silent scream. But it wasn't her blood, it was her cat. What remained of it. Its body was intact, but its insides gone. The same 2 holes and something carved into the wood of her door. A symbol. 3 claw marks in a circle. Not a warning, a message. Miguel covered it with a cloth, but Isadora saw it before he did. And when she blinked, she saw it again. In her mind. Burning, glowing. A sigil, one meant to bind or summon. And then the fog returned. Thicker than ever, rolling through the streets like a living thing. And behind it, footsteps, heavy, measured, unhurried. Miguel raised his shotgun as the fog spilled through the main street, his breath sharp in his chest. The others behind him, Raimundo, Elias, Father Mario, all stood frozen. The air smelled wrong. Like rust, like something old and rotting that should never have walked again. And then, from the veil of mist, came a shape, not large, not monstrous, but wrong. Too long in the limbs, too narrow in the body, covered in what looked like fur, but moved like skin. Its eyes burned, red, rimmed in black. Its face was obscured, hidden beneath a mask of shadow and bone. And when it opened its mouth, there were no sounds, no growl, no roar, just the rush of wind being pulled into it, as if it were inhaling the very fear from the air. The shotgun fired, once, twice. The creature didn't fall, it didn't even flinch, it vanished. Not ran, vanished, as if the fog had swallowed it whole. Silence. Raimundo dropped to his knees. Father Mario, clutched his crucifix. Miguel lowered the barrel slowly, and from behind them, in the distance, the chapel bell rang 3 times. No one had pulled the rope. That night, the villagers didn't sleep. They sat in circles with candles. They prayed, they cried, and in the corner of her room, Isadora drew. She drew the face she couldn't see, the mouth without sound, the eyes that had no mercy, and beneath it, the symbol. 3 claws, a circle, and fire. Because she knew now. It wasn't just death that had come to São Vicente. It was something worse. Something that liked to watch first. Something that marked its favorites, and she was one of them, outside. The wind rose again. But it wasn't the wind. It was breathing, and it was waiting. Chapter 2. Blood in the Fields. They say trauma echoes, like a scream trapped in a canyon, returning again and again, distorted but never gone. In São Vicente, the echo wasn't fading. It was growing louder, each day since the fog swallowed the thing, since the bell rang itself and the claw symbol burned itself into memory. The village had become a hollow version of itself. Doors stayed shut. Meals went uneaten. Shadows stretched longer than they should. And in the minds of everyone who remained, a single question throbbed like a pulse. What comes next? The answer came with the crops. It started in the sugarcane fields east of the village. They were the lifeblood of São Vicente. Old, dry, stubborn fields that still managed to yield enough to trade with neighboring towns. But now, something was wrong. The stalks were dying, not from drought or insects, from inside. Miguel was the first to notice. He took Isadora with him the morning after the creature vanished in the fog. They hadn't spoken of what they'd seen. Not really. He only said, "Stay close," and handed her a machete to cut cane. But when he struck the first stalk, it didn't fall. It collapsed, hollow, rotten. Inside the husk, instead of fibers and juice, there was black sludge, sticky, foul, smelling, faintly, of metal and decay. Isadora stepped back, hand covering her nose. Miguel knelt and touched it. It clung to his fingertips. He wiped it on his pants, but the stain remained. That was the first field. By dusk, 3 more had shown signs. By the end of the week, half of São Vicente's harvest was infected, and in the center of the largest field, deep in the rows where no one had walked in weeks, they found a circle of earth that pulsed, not visibly, not with movement, with heat. The soil was warm, too warm. The air above it shimmered faintly. Insects lay dead on the rim. A single black feather rested in the center. No birds in that part of Brazil had feathers that black. And when Father Mario placed his hand over it, he recoiled as if stung. "Something is nesting," he said, and everyone knew what he meant. Not birds, not animals. Raimundo arrived the next morning with news no one wanted to hear. More animals had turned up dead. 3 goats, 2 chickens, 1 mule, all drained, all with the same wounds. And this time, in the dirt next to the mule, someone found more of the black sludge, seeping up through the ground. Not spilled, not splashed. Seeping, like a root or a vein. Father Mario ordered the chapel bells to ring 3 times before noon, an old signal. One only the elders remembered. It meant, "Come now, come armed." By midday, 24 villagers stood inside the church, armed with knives, bats, tools, and even a rusted revolver or 2. "We have to dig it up," said Miguel. "Whatever it is, we find it and burn it." Father Mario didn't object, but his eyes drifted toward Isadora. "She's seen it," he said softly. The room went quiet. She swallowed hard. "I saw it once," she whispered. "In the fog, in the dream behind the well." "You drew it," someone added. She nodded. "I can take you to where I felt it, where the air doesn't breathe." No one laughed. Not anymore. So they followed her, past the edge of the cane fields, past the dead trees, to a place where no birds sang, and the ground was warm beneath their feet. They began to dig, with shovels, with hands, with anything they had. Soil came up damp, then clumpy, then thick with that same black sludge that coated the inside of the cane. The smell made them gag. Even the toughest among them had to step away. But they kept digging, deeper, until the sound changed, from the scrape of metal on earth to the dull knock of wood. They uncovered something buried, a door, not like the doors in their homes. This one was old, thick, carved from a single slab of wood, blackened with time. Symbols covered its surface, some familiar like crosses and circles, and some older, wrong. They hesitated. No one spoke. Then, as if compelled, Isadora stepped forward. She knelt, placed her palm against the wood, and whispered something none of them recognized. The door shuddered, and the earth beneath them groaned. The villagers stumbled back as the ground vibrated beneath their feet, softly at first like a heartbeat, then stronger, as if the land itself were trying to breathe. Miguel pulled Isadora away from the wooden slab. "What did you say?" "I don't know," she whispered, trembling. "It just came to me." The symbols on the door began to glow faintly. Not bright, not visible under the sun, but when a shadow fell across them, they pulsed with reddish light, like embers buried in ash. "No more," said Donalina, who had followed at the back of the group. "Close it. Bury it again." "We can't," Father Mario said, eyes locked on the door. "It's awake now." Raimundo dropped his shovel. "We should run." "To where?" Miguel snapped. "This isn't something we can outrun." Then the wind changed. It rushed over the field in a single wave, bending the cane stalks in one direction. The trees groaned, and from beneath the soil came a sound no one could explain, like stones grinding in a throat. Isadora clutched her chest. "I can feel it. It's looking for me, not just you," Father Mario said. "For all of us." The light faded from the door. The ground stopped shaking, but the fear didn't lift. They stood in silence for a long time. Then, together, they covered the door. Not to hide it, not to protect it, but to mark it, to remember where not to step, where not to dig. And as they left the field in single file, the sun dipped low and the fog returned, coiling through the trees, trailing behind them like a slow, patient thing. Watching, waiting. That night, a new sound joined the darkness, whispers in the cane. Not from mouths, from the stalks themselves. They rustled and rattled even without wind, shifting in rhythm like breath. The sound spread across the village, faint but inescapable. The villagers tried to sleep, tried to pray, but dreams came instead, shared again, like a sickness carried in the air. Everyone saw the same field, the same pulsing door. But now, in their dreams, it wasn't closed, it was open, and something moved behind it. Isadora woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around her legs like vines. Her room felt colder than it should. Her breath fogged the air. She stepped to the window, half expecting the fog to be waiting. It was, but not alone. Footprints lined up beneath her window. Bare, human, leading away. She dressed quickly, grabbed the flashlight from the shelf, and slipped outside before her parents could wake. The footprints led past the goat pen, past the well, past the last fence post, toward the field, the one they'd buried. She followed, heart hammering. The light flickered in her hand, casting long, thin shadows that danced across the grass. At the edge of the field, the earth felt softer, damp. And then she saw them, more footprints, but these were different. Clawed, deeper, paced beside the bare human, bonds, walking in unison, not dragging, not chasing. Together. She knelt, placed her hand beside one of the impressions. It was fresh, still warm. Behind her, the cane rustled once. Then again, then something stepped out. Not a monster, a boy, no older than... Paulo, eyes glazed, feet bare, clothes torn, and standing just behind him, half seen in the mist, a taller shape, slender, silent. It placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and both turned to look at her, then vanished. Isadora screamed, but no one heard, because the cane swallowed sound, just like it swallowed everything else. She ran, blindly, tearing through the brush, catching her arms on the thorny vines, breath short, heart thundering like war drums in her chest. The flashlight fell from her hand and disappeared into the mist, but she didn't stop. Not until the warm light of her house came into view. Not until her father's voice cut through the early light. "Isadora!" She collapsed into his arms, sobbing. He held her tightly, trembling too. Behind him, Roselli stood at the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, eyes wide. What happened? Isadora couldn't find the words. Her voice was a broken whisper. The boy. Her father's grip tightened. "What boy?" She looked up at him. "The missing one. From last week. He's with it." Miguel's face drained of color. Roselli covered her mouth with both hands. "You saw it again?" Isadora nodded, "and it saw me." By midday, the village had gathered again, this time without summons. Fear pulled them together. No one wanted to say what they already knew. The creature was taking more than blood now. It was taking people. Father Mario tried to speak, but his voice shook. "It's using them, possessing them, walking through them." "No," said Donna Elena. "It's copying them." Whispers rose. Then, "Who can we trust?" someone asked. Silence. Because the answer had already taken root in their minds. No one. The door had been opened, something had been let in, and now it could be anyone, even them, especially them. That night, a new symbol was found, carved into the church doors. Not the circle, not the claws, a spiral, endless. And inside it, a name, etched deep, Isadora. The church stayed closed the next morning, no bells, no priest. The symbol had been scrubbed, but the groove it left could still be felt beneath the fingertips, and no one dared speak her name aloud. Isadora didn't leave the house. Miguel boarded the windows and kept the lights low. Roselli sat by the stove, clutching her rosary so tightly the beads left deep impressions in her palms. They all knew something had shifted. The creature wasn't hunting anymore. It was choosing. At dusk, someone knocked at the door. 3 short taps, then silence. Miguel stood, shotgun in hand, and opened it slowly. Nothing, just the wind, until they saw it, a single item laid gently on the doorstep. Isadora's drawing notebook. She hadn't seen it since the night of the first dream. She reached for it with a trembling hand. On the cover, drawn in something darker than ink, was the spiral. Inside, every page had been filled. Drawings of her, sleeping, sitting, staring out the window, pages and pages of her. Watched from behind, above, below, and at the very center of the book, one last image, her standing at the buried door, her hand pressed to the wood, and behind her, the creature, eyes burning, mouth open, smiling. Chapter 3. The Hollowed Woods. There are woods the map forgets, places that exist in the shadow between what is named and what is known. São Vicente had one, a stretch of tangled trees at the northern ridge, where the ground turned black with roots and the air never dried. The elders called it Oco Velho, the hollow. Few had entered. None had stayed long, and none had ever spoken of what they saw beneath its canopy. Now the village had no choice but to return to it, because something had been watching from those trees all along, and it was ready to be seen. The decision came at dawn. The sun barely rose, obscured behind a veil of ash-colored clouds. The fields were silent. The animals, those that remained, refused to eat. And inside the chapel, a single word was written on the altar in dried, flaking blood. Volte. Return. Father Mario gathered the few still brave or desperate enough to act. Miguel, Donna Elena, Raimundo, and Isadora, who no longer flinched at shadows but followed them instead. They packed lightly, tools, lanterns, matches, salt, no prayers, not anymore. The path to Ocovello was barely a trail. More memory than road. Trees leaned close as if listening, moss-covered stone and bark alike, and the deeper they walked, the more the forest seemed to close behind them. Isadora led the way. She didn't know why, but her feet moved without asking the by. Notebook never left her side. She had stopped drawing. Now it drew for her. Images appeared each time she opened it, scrawled in ink she hadn't touched. Figures and eyes and doors and claws, and now it had shown her a clearing, a stone ring in the woods, a circle of roots. She recognized it before they arrived. So did the others. It was here, whispered Donna. Lena, 50 years ago, the first time it came. No one spoke of what happened back then. Most had buried it deep, but the clearing remembered. Miguel stepped into the ring. The wind stopped. The birds vanished and the trees exhaled with a sound like 1,000 breaths caught in rot. Something moved beneath the roots. The ground cracked open in hairline fractures, widening slowly, then pausing as if testing the air. Raimundo raised his lantern. What is that? The earth in the center of the ring bulged, then split. Not a hole, not a tunnel. A mouth, a vertical seam of earth peeled open like old flesh, revealing a gaping tunnel lined with twisted roots that pulsed and twitched like nerves. Isadora stepped forward. The notebook in her arms began to bleed. Thick black ink poured from the seams, soaking into her clothes, her hands, the ground. She didn't cry out. She only said one word, down. Miguel grabbed her arm. We're not going in there. But, Father Mario interrupted, we have to. It's not just showing us where it is, it's inviting her. Donna Elena's voice trembled, or luring. They argued in broken whispers as the opening pulsed, widening, and from within the hollow came a sound no one expected. A voice. Familiar. Calling softly, Isadora. She froze. The voice was unmistakable. Her brother. Paulo, she whispered, stepping toward the mouth of the tunnel. Miguel held her back. That's not him. You know that. I know, she whispered, but it sounds like him. The roots trembled. A breeze rose from within, warm, wet, and metallic. The smell of blood and memory. Father Mario crossed himself. We go together, he said. We don't separate. And one by one, they descended. The walls of the tunnel were slick with moss and something thicker. The light from their lanterns shimmered against the damp bark, revealing carvings in the roots, symbols, faces, open mouths. The air grew colder as they descended, but no breath fogged. No time passed, or maybe all time did. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a chamber. Round, wide, breathing. The floor was made of woven roots, pulsing with dull light. The ceiling throbbed like the inside of a beast's lung. And in the center stood a stone altar, cracked, ancient and wet with black ink that oozed up from below. Isadora approached it slowly. The notebook vibrated in her hand, then flung itself open. The pages turned in a blur until it landed on a new drawing. A girl, bound to the altar, eyes open. Not in fear, in understanding, Miguel shouted. We're leaving, now. But the tunnel behind them sealed shut. Roots crawled over the entrance like fingers weaving a shroud, and then the altar began to rise. Not on stone, on legs, dozens of them, thin, knotted, clawed, and beneath it, the creature, fully formed, no longer hiding in shadow or fog. It had a face now, because it had borrowed theirs. Father Mario gasped. That's me. The thing's mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, but it made no sound. Its eyes shifted, flickering between features. First Raimundo's nose, then Miguel's brow, then Isadora's mouth. A collage of stolen identity. It stepped forward. The legs beneath the altar moved in sync, carrying the weight like a throne. Donna. Lena clutched her pendant. It's not just mimicking us, it's learning. From the walls, black sap began to seep faster. The roots curled and coiled along the chamber, whispering in dead tongues. Isadora stared into the creature's eyes, into her own reflection. It blinked with her rhythm. Why me? She whispered, and the creature answered, not aloud, inside. It filled her mind with images, flashes of its birth in the dark, of blood offerings beneath the soil, of a pact signed long before her village had a name. You opened the door. It breathed into her mind. You kept drawing it. She dropped the notebook. It hit the floor with a sound too heavy for paper. Miguel stepped in front of her. Stay back, he roared, raising the machete. The creature cocked its head, curious, then raised one of its arms, a cluster of claws on a stalk of fused limbs, and pointed at Miguel. The roots beneath him surged upward. They didn't pierce. They pulled, sank into his skin, and began to drink. He screamed as they drained the life from him, his eyes rolling back, his mouth foaming. Isadora lunged to stop it, but Father Mario held her back. Don't! Let me go, she cried. It's killing him. He's already gone, the priest said, eyes wet with fury. The creature tilted its head, mimicking her father's last gasp. Then it began to walk toward her, step by step, its voice filled. Her skull. Come back to me. She stumbled back, nearly slipping on the slick roots. I'm not yours. She hissed, teeth clenched. But the creature smiled wider, if that rictus could be called a smile at all. It opened its mouth. Inside, more faces, dozens of them, twisting, screaming, familiar. The boy, the mule, the goats, even Paolo's dog, all trapped, all alive. Donna Lena collapsed to her knees. We brought it back. We brought it back. Isadora turned to Father Mario. Is there a way to send it back? His face was ashen. There was, long ago, but the ritual was buried, lost. It's not lost, Isadora whispered. She pointed to the notebook. The pages were still turning, and now they showed symbols, diagrams, instructions written in an old hand, inked in what looked like dried blood. She picked it up, held it open. The creature paused. Speak it, it growled, and you join them. She looked up. No, she said, I'm not like you. Then she began to chant. The language was ancient. Her tongue struggled to wrap around the shapes. The chamber shook. The roots recoiled. The altar cracked. The creature howled, no longer with stolen voices, but its own. A shriek of earth and death. It lunged, but the notebook burned in her hands, radiating light, and the roots split apart beneath it. One final word, carved in her throat, not her mind, ripped through the void. Return. The creature collapsed, the light burst, and all went black. Isadora opened her eyes to daylight. The chamber was gone, the woods above her, the others beside her, but Miguel was not. The notebook rested beside her, blank, silent, and the roots beneath her boots had stopped pulsing. For now. Chapter 4. Eyes in the Cornfield. There is a moment after trauma, brief and cruel, when the world pretends to be normal again. But it never truly is. After the hollowed woods, São Vicente did not return to peace. It returned to silence, and in that silence, things began to change. Children started speaking in voices that weren't theirs. Lanterns flickered where no wind blew, and at night, in the tall corn that bordered the last few surviving fields, eyes began to blink open. Too many eyes, too human, too wrong. The town was quieter now, not in mourning but in waiting. Father Mario no longer held services. He no longer left the chapel. The bell tower, blackened from rot, swayed in the wind like a warning too tired to shout. Isadora walked with her head low, avoiding her reflection in windows and buckets of water. She'd seen something staring back, once. Something that looked like her but smiled with the wrong teeth. The notebook had not written again, but she kept it with her. Always. Miguel's absence carved a hollow in the town. Roselli had stopped speaking entirely. She kept to the kitchen, making food she never served, singing hymns with no melody. Her eyes no longer followed the sun, only the door, as if waiting for someone to come through, or something. The cornfields had grown unnaturally tall, twice what they should have been, and the leaves cut flesh when brushed against. Children began to whisper that something lived between the rows. Not a creature, a copy, a version of their fathers and mothers, their teachers, their neighbors. "I saw my brother," one girl said, "but he never came home. He's still out there and he keeps calling my name." That night, she vanished. The next morning her eyes were found. Just the eyes, laid neatly on the steps of the schoolhouse, wrapped in a single corn husk. Isadora stopped, sleeping. She stayed up late into the night, watching the corn sway under moonlight that never reached the ground. She began to count the eyes. 4, then 8, then 12, always blinking, always watching. Then one night, they blinked in unison and all turned to her. She didn't scream, she didn't run. She walked forward, slowly, carefully, as if in a trance. The corn parted for her. She heard no birds, no insects. Just breathing. Deep. In rhythm. As though the earth itself was slumbering beneath her steps. She passed scarecrows, only there hadn't been any before. Now there were 3. One wore a dress like Donna Lena's. One had a priest's collar. The third had no face, but its hands were hers. She reached a clearing in the middle of the corn where the soil had turned dark, soft. A single scarecrow stood in the center, its head tilted as she approached. "Isadora," it whispered. She knew the voice. "Paolo, no," she said. "You're not him." The scarecrow's arms twitched. "You let me in." It reached up and tore the sackcloth from its head, and underneath was her own face, smiling. "You're mine now." Isadora stumbled back, tripping over a root that hadn't been there a moment before. The ground shifted beneath her feet, turning soft, then hard again, as if the field were breathing with her fear. The scarecrow didn't move, but its mouth opened wider. Not with bone or flesh, but with tearing seams of stitched canvas and something pulsing beneath. From its throat came a sound, low, wet, almost like laughter, but broken, like something trying to remember how to mimic joy. Behind her, the corn rustled. Footsteps. She turned, rows and rows of them, more scarecrows, dozens, all standing, all with familiar features, faces she knew, neighbors, friends, Miguel. They didn't speak, but their mouths twitched as if trying, and in one voice they finally did. "Isadora," she screamed then. The sound tore from her like glass, sharp and panicked. She turned and ran, cutting her hands on the leaves, stumbling over roots, slashing through the corn that now resisted her every movement. The sky above pulsed red. The moon flickered like a failing bulb. She broke free from the field near the abandoned well, collapsing on the dusty ground, gasping for breath when she looked back. The corn was still, perfect, untouched, but the scarecrow was gone. The clearing too, as if she had dreamed it, but her hands were bleeding, and in her pocket, tucked into the notebook, was a scrap of sackcloth. Still, warm, still smiling. She didn't speak of what happened. Not that night. Not the next day, but people noticed. They always noticed. Father Mario knocked on her door that evening, his eyes hollow, voice barely a whisper. "You saw something," he said. She didn't deny it. He sat across from her at the small table in the kitchen, glancing once at the notebook resting beside her. It hadn't opened since the hollowed woods. "You know what it means when it mimics you," he said. She nodded. "It's trying to become me." He leaned forward. "Or it already has." That night the villagers heard something move through the corn, not walking, weaving. It didn't rustle the stalks. It whispered through them. The children called it aquele que espreita, the one who watches. And now the cornfield breathed. Every night, closer. Every night, louder. Rosalie stopped sleeping. She sat by the window staring into the dark, with the stove's light flickering across her face. One night, Isadora found her with her hand pressed against the glass. "There's something out there," she said. "I know," Isadora replied. "I think it's waiting for you." "No," she whispered. "It's watching you too." Later, she opened the notebook. A single page had filled itself. No drawings, no symbols, just a sentence in black ink. "The corn has roots deeper than the trees," and below it, a second line appeared, "and it grows best when watered in blood." The next morning, 3 villagers were missing, a father, a teacher, and a mute boy who never cried. Their homes were untouched, no signs of struggle, no blood, just silence. And in the fields, 3 scarecrows where there had been none. Each one wore their clothing. Each one stared at the village with hollow sacks for eyes. The priest refused to ring the bell. Instead, he gathered the names of the missing in a rusted metal tin and buried it beneath the altar, sealing it with salt. "Names have power," he told Isadora, "and something is collecting them." The whispers grew bolder. Children began answering voices no one else heard. At night, doors opened without a sound, and always the corn stood taller. Isadora began sleeping during the day. Her dreams were clearer in daylight, less twisted, less loud. But even then the notebook watched her, not moved, watched, and on the 7th night it opened again. This time the page showed her house, drawn from above. Every room lit, every window open, and a single line beneath. "It's inside." Isadora didn't move. She sat on the floor, the notebook open on her lap, the ink still wet on the page as if the warning had been written only seconds ago. The house was silent, too silent. She could hear her own heartbeat, her own breath, but nothing else. No creak from the hallway, no wind against the glass, no soft, distant sound of her mother in the kitchen. "Rosalie," she called out once, then again. Her voice cracked on the second try. No answer. Slowly, Isadora stood. She left the notebook, open on the floor, and picked up the kitchen knife Miguel had once kept near the stove. The weight of it felt wrong in her hand, too heavy, too dull. She moved through the house slowly, room by room, checking corners, closets, shadows. The windows were all shut, locked, but the front door, open, just slightly. The air coming through it smelled like dirt and rust and something old, something buried. She stepped toward it and pushed it closed with a soft click, then turned. Rosalie stood in the hallway, staring at her, mouth slightly open, eyes unblinking. "Mom," Isadora whispered. Her mother didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't breathe, not until she smiled. The same smile from the scarecrow, from the notebook, from the thing beneath the hollow. Isadora took a step back, and her mother took one forward. That's when she knew. Her mother was gone, and the cornfield had come inside. Isadora backed away slowly, her bare feet cold against the tile. "Stay there," she said, voice shaking. "Please." Rosalie's smile didn't fade. Instead, she tilted her head and began to hum. A broken lullaby. The same song she used to sing to Isadora when she was little. But the notes were wrong. Sour. The rhythm lagged, twisted. It wasn't a memory. It was a mockery. The thing in her mother's skin raised one hand, and from beneath her fingernails, tiny black fibers pushed through. Corn silk, rotting, moving like worms. Isadora turned and ran. She slammed the back door open, knife still in hand, and sprinted through the alley, past the chicken coops, into the street. Empty. Dead. The town had gone quiet again, but not with fear, with anticipation. A single figure stood at the end of the street. Another Rosalie. Mouth stitched, shut, eyes wide with blood. As Isadora watched, the skin on its face peeled back slowly, deliberately, revealing not bone, but stalk. Green, alive. The corn was wearing her, and it was multiplying. More figures emerged, not walking, sliding. Their feet didn't lift, their limbs didn't swing. They moved as though the ground pulled them forward, inviting, delivering. One wore the face of the grocer. Another looked like Father Mario, but younger, untouched by grief. A third bore no face at all, just skin, stretched smooth like old wax, with teeth drawn in charcoal where a mouth should be. Their heads turned in perfect unison. Toward her, Isadora backed away until her spine hit the cold stone of the chapel wall. Her breaths came fast, fogging the air in puffs. Then she heard it again. The hum. Soft at first, then rising, every window in town began to vibrate. Not with sound, but with resonance. The hum came from underground. From beneath the fields, a chorus made of soil and breath, and bones, and above it all, the rustling of the corn, not from the wind, from motion. Thousands of stalks leaning forward, bowing toward the village like supplicants before a god, and Isadora knew. This was not just possession, it was worship. The corn wasn't serving something, it was becoming something, and it had chosen her as its bride. A shadow fell over the chapel, not from the clouds, from above. The moon, once full, was being swallowed by something black and crawling, like roots across the sky. Isadora stumbled inside the chapel, slamming the doors shut behind her. The old hinges shrieked, the pews were overturned, the altar flickered with dying. Candles. Wax dripped in spirals across the floor. At the pulpit stood Father Mario. His eyes were hollow, his voice was low. "They've come to bless the harvest," he said. She stepped forward slowly. "You're not him." "No," he said, smiling with teeth made of husk and bark, "but I remember being him." He raised a hand and the floorboards groaned. Roots broke through the wood. They slithered toward her, wrapping around her feet, rising like veins of the earth. She dropped the knife. She reached for the notebook instead. It pulsed in her hands, alive, breathing. The pages turned with violent speed, then stopped. A symbol, drawn in blood, and a single instruction. "Burn the seed." She looked at the altar, at the roots, at the pulsing thing beneath the floor, and she understood. She ran for the candelabra. Father Mario, the thing wearing him, screamed. The walls shook, the roof cracked. She thrust the flame into the floor. The roots recoiled, the earth howled, a cry not of pain, but of betrayal. The altar split. A black seed rose from the hollow. It pulsed with eyes. It bled. It saw her. She threw the flame. The fire caught, the seed ignited, and everything screamed. The corn, the scarecrows, the false voices, even the moon, and Isadora stood in the center of it all, burning, breaking, becoming. Chapter 5. The Tracks of the Beast. Fire does not destroy evil, it only burns away the disguise. When dawn broke over São Vicente, it rose behind a sky choked with ash. The chapel still smoldered. The cornfields had withered into black husks that snapped and hissed when touched. Smoke clung to the houses like a shroud, and Isadora stood at the edge of what used to be the altar, her skin covered in soot, her eyes emptied of sleep, her voice no longer hers. What she had burned was not the end. It was the signal. Something had escaped. Something that could no longer be bound by roots or worship or imitation. It no longer needed to wear faces. It had one of its own now, and it had left tracks. The villagers emerged cautiously from their homes. Most of them had not seen the blaze. They had heard the screams, echoing not from the fields but from inside their own walls. They had felt the shaking, mild at first, then pulsing like something clawing its way upward through the bones of the town. Now they stood in the center of the village, not speaking. The chapel's bell was gone. Only the rusted frame remained, twisted and scorched. Father Mario was never found. Neither was Roselli, only ash and prints. The first were small, shallow, like those of a child running barefoot through soot. But as they spread across the village, past the fountain, beyond the perimeter of the burned corn, down the broken path toward the hills, they changed. They deepened, widened, stretched, and by the edge of the woods, the prints no longer looked human. Isadora stood over them. The notebook had not written since the fire. But she didn't need it now, she could feel it. The thing she had burned was walking, and it was calling others to follow. Meeting was held that night. Half the village gathered in the abandoned schoolhouse. The rest stayed hidden, not out of fear, but out of guilt. Too many had bowed before it. Too many had whispered to the corn. And now, with no crops to hide behind, they had to look one another in the face. Donna Lina stood and spoke first. Her voice was calm, resigned. "This is not the end," she said. "It is the beginning of something with teeth." Isadora listened from the back. She had not spoken since the chapel, but the villagers turned to her all the same. They looked to her not because they trusted her, but because she had survived, and that made her dangerous. She stepped forward, voice low. "I didn't kill it. I woke it." No one replied. They already knew. She opened her palm. In it was a single shard of the seed. Black, still warm. It pulsed like a heartbeat. And outside the window, in the dust of the road, fresh tracks began to form, heading north, toward the dark hills, where the roots had never reached, where something older still waited and watched, waiting to be found. The hunt began before morning. Isadora rose in the dark, led not by duty, but by something deeper, a thrum in her blood that pulled her forward. As the villagers slept or whispered prayers they no longer believed, she packed what little she needed. The notebook, a tin flask of water, a broken compass that still trembled in the creature's direction. By the time the sun painted the hills in bruised gold, she was already far from the village, walking in silence across dead earth. The tracks were easy to follow at first, deep gouges in the soil, wide and sunken, shaped like nothing that should walk upright. Clawed at the toes, split at the heel. Each step burned the grass beneath it. She followed them into the hills, through the old gorges where shepherds once led goats before the nights turned bloody. Here the wind no longer moved like air, but like breath. By midday, she found the first offering. A goat, hollowed. No blood. No skin. Its body lay open like a map, each organ placed beside it in perfect symmetry. its eyes removed but facing upward. There were symbols carved into its bones, the same ones she had once drawn in the notebook. But she hadn't drawn them. It had. And now it was leaving her messages again. She pressed forward, into a thicket of dead pine, through dry rivers and abandoned tools buried in the hills like forgotten prayers. The trees here leaned away from the path. The birds had long gone. Only the flies remained, and even they avoided the prints. She found the first of them near sundown, a man, or what had once been one. He sat upright, back against a tree, eyes open, mouth smiling. His face was calm, too calm, and from the corners of his mouth, black fibers stretched outward like veins of tar. Something had bloomed inside him and was still growing. Carved into the bark above his head were the words, "You're close now." And beside it, a perfect drawing of Isadora's face. Mouth open, screaming. But no sound came from her own lips, because in the distance, on the highest ridge of the hill, a silhouette stood watching her. Tall, crooked, patient, waiting. It had led her here, and it wasn't done. Isadora did not move, neither did the figure. The sun dropped lower, and the shadows lengthened like claws across the hill. The air turned bitter. The silence stretched tight until it snapped with the distant sound of something breaking, bone or branch, she couldn't tell. Then the silhouette disappeared, not into the trees, into the ground. It sank straight down, as if the hill had opened its mouth. Isadora hesitated only a moment before climbing. The ridge was steep, slick with old moss and loose shale. Each step slid backward slightly, as though the hill itself resisted her ascent. Her hands bled where thorns scraped her palms, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her legs burned, her vision blurred. Still, she climbed. At the top, the world opened. A flat clearing lay beyond the ridge, surrounded by jagged stones and blackened trees. In the center stood a ring of ancient posts, splintered and sunk deep into the ground like broken teeth. And in the middle of the ring, a pit. Wide, deep, breathing. The wind here pulsed in and out of it, slow and steady, as if the world below were alive and dreaming. She stepped closer. The tracks led to the edge, then stopped, but she knew it had gone down. The smoke from the pit rose in tendrils, not straight, spiraled, as if shaped by something unseen. She knelt and touched the soil, warm, sticky. Faint vibrations moved through her fingertips like a pulse, like a heart. She reached for the notebook. It had opened on its own. This time, the drawing was different. It showed her, standing exactly where she was, looking down, and from the pit, something climbing, something that had been waiting for her. She closed the book, and the wind stopped. The forest stopped, and then something laughed, not loud, not human. A laugh made of splinters and smoke, and it echoed from the pit. She stumbled backward, nearly falling, her hand still clutching the notebook. Then came the sound of shifting. Not footsteps, grinding, stone dragging against stone. The earth moaned, and something emerged. Long limbs, pale as bone, a torso stretched too far, joints bent the wrong way, and its face. No, not a face. A mask of bark and ash, but beneath it, her own eyes stared back. It knew her. It had followed her through fire and blood and worship. It no longer needed roots to rise. It had evolved. Isadora, it said. Its voice came from beneath its mask, but also from inside her skull. I wore the earth. I wore your mother. I wore the priest. But you... Its head tilted. You are harder to wear. She raised the notebook. Then try. It lunged. She leapt aside, rolling across the cold stones. The pit widened behind it, breathing faster. Hands clawed up from below, half-formed, broken, bleeding. The creature was not alone. It had called its kin, dozens of them, no two alike, all of them shaped by stolen flesh, a mockery of every soul it had devoured. She backed toward the ring of posts. There, carved into the stone, she saw them, symbols, the same that once bled from the notebook. She dropped to her knees. She pressed her hand to the markings. They burned, not her flesh. Her memory. Visions slammed into her. Flashes of the original pact. Villagers. Carving oaths into trees, sacrificing voices, blood, names. The creature had once been bound here, and the binding had been forgotten. She remembered. She began to speak the old words. The air grew heavy, the sky pulsed, the creature screamed, not in pain, but in fury. Its kin clawed toward her, slowed, faltering. She screamed the final word. The posts ignited, pillars of flame circled the pit, and the creatures wailed. One by one they turned to ash, even the beast. It fought hardest, but its eyes, her eyes, blinked once before they vanished in smoke. The wind returned, but it was clean. And the earth was quiet. Isadora collapsed, the notebook beside her, blank again. The tracks had ended, but in the ash, something still pulsed, a single black root, still warm, still waiting. Chapter 6. The Whispering Bones. When evil is burned, it doesn't vanish, it scatters. Ash is just the lie it leaves behind. The fires had gone cold, the pit sealed itself with time. But the things it had touched, people, places, bones, did not forget. Isadora awoke to find São Vicente buried in stillness. No smoke, no whispers, no monsters, but no birds either, no dogs barking, no wind through the sugarcane stubs, only silence, the kind that hums behind your teeth, and beneath it something else, faint, rhythmic, a tapping beneath the floorboards. She rose from her bed slowly, every joint stiff as if she had slept for 100 years. The tapping continued, not loud, not frantic, steady, tap, tap, tap. It came from beneath the wooden planks, under the bed, under the nails. She pressed her ear to the floor. It stopped. She stayed there, waiting. Then, tap, 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 faster, urgent. Isadora stood quickly, heart racing. She looked at the notebook on her desk. It hadn't moved since the pit. She reached for it anyway. The moment her fingers brushed the cover, the tapping stopped. But the air shifted. The walls of the room seemed to exhale, long and slow, as if the house had been holding its breath. Then came the scent, dirt, salt, bone, and behind it, the stench of rot left too long in the sun. She turned toward the window. The sky was gray, not from storm but from dust, as if something had been unearthed far too wide. She stepped outside. The village was empty, not abandoned. Paused. Every door hung half open, every curtain fluttered without wind, and all around her, bones. Small bones, lined. Up across the street, set in patterns, some shaped like runes, others like faces. One set arranged to resemble her name. She walked through them, her breath held, her hands trembling. They clicked as she passed, one by one, as though following her with sound. She turned the corner and saw it, the cemetery. Wide, open. Every grave disturbed, not dug, split. Like something had clawed its way out. She stepped into the graveyard. No birds, no crickets, only the crunch of her feet over fractured tombstones and split caskets. At the center, the oldest mausoleum had been opened. Not forced, invited. The stone door rested gently on its side, no cracks, no signs of violence. Inside, the crypt smelled of myrrh and decay. She stepped into the darkness. There, in the center of the room, stood a table carved from a single slab of bone, and on it, the notebook, open, new pages filled, not with words, with names. Every name of the villagers still alive. Everyone crossed out, except hers. Isadora staggered backward, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the weight of every name scratched from the page, as if each line carved a notch into her spine. She reached for the notebook with trembling fingers. The instant she touched the page, the ink shimmered. A single word began to etch itself beneath the final uncrossed name, Witness. The bones on the floor shifted. A slow, scraping sound echoed through the crypt. Rib cages rattled, skulls rolled to face her. Vertebrae clicked into alignment as though summoned by ancient muscle memory, and then the bones began to rise. Not fully, not yet, but enough to suggest form, movement, purpose. She backed away from the table. The mausoleum grew colder. From the walls, long-forgotten plaques began to crumble, revealing carvings beneath them, glyphs older than the Portuguese settlers, older than the town, older than the language she dreamed in. Symbols she had seen in her visions, symbols that burned behind her eyelids at night. Her foot struck something hard. She looked down, a skull, small, child-sized, its eye sockets packed with dried leaves, its mouth sewn shut with black string. It whispered anyway. "I remember you," she screamed. The sound didn't echo, it vanished into the walls, and then all the bones answered. Whispers rose like steam. "We buried it, we prayed, we sealed it, we lied, we fed it, we named it, we wore its mask. You are the last. The roots are deep, the blood is old. The bones remember." She turned to flee, but the entrance had vanished. Where the door once stood, there was only stone. Cold, seamless, unmoving. She was sealed in. The notebook flapped open again. This time, not names, a map. Not of the village, not of the hills, a map of something beneath. Passages carved through stone and time. An ossuary. A grave beneath the graves, and at its center, a chamber marked only with a spiral, and below it, 3 words in ancient ink. Dig. Listen. Speak. Isadora stared at the page until the ink dried. Then she fell to her knees. The stone beneath her hands was warm, not from heat but from memory, from blood long spilled. From footsteps walked 1,000 years ago, the air thickened as she pressed her palms to the floor. She spoke a word she did not know. The stone responded. It cracked. Just slightly, enough to whisper back. She scraped the tips of her fingers across the hairline fracture. Tiny bones, bird-like and fragile, tumbled from the cracks. A finger joint, a tooth, a vertebra smaller than a coin. The floor beneath the crypt was made of bodies, and they wanted to be heard. She dug with bare hands. She tore at the stone, at the bone dust, at the past. The notebook glowed faintly beside her. Each time her skin split, each time blood hit the ground, a new glyph revealed itself in the carvings. She was bleeding an alphabet. After what felt like hours, the stone gave way. She fell through it, down, into the dark. The ossuary below was colder than death. Bones lined the walls like shelves, not arranged, not buried, grown. They protruded from the rock like roots, bent around corners, formed seats, arches and doorways. They pulsed with sound, not music, breath. She passed through halls without light, guided only by the rhythmic murmur of the whispers. She walked. She saw visions carved in femurs, scratched into skulls, images of the villagers centuries ago, feeding something, worshipping something, burying something they never meant to stay dead, and at the heart of it all, a spiral, always the spiral. She followed it. The deeper she went, the louder the whispers became. She stopped at a wide chamber shaped like a ribcage. Inside stood a stone dais, and on it a box, bone white, locked with cords of human hair, and from inside something tapped, tap, 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 her name, spelled in sound. She stepped closer. The notebook opened one last time and wrote, "This is the first mouth, and the last warning." She reached for the box, and the bones began to sing. It was not music, it was memory, every note a death, every pause a birth. The melody carried the weight of centuries. Chants from burned villages, lullabies turned to screams, prayers that had no heaven left to reach. Isadora's hand hovered over the box. She felt the hum move into her chest, nestling between her ribs like a heartbeat that did not belong to her. The hair cords undid themselves, uncoiling slowly, falling like serpents onto the dais. The lid of the box slid aside with no sound. Inside, something small and smooth, a jawbone, pale, human, perfect, and etched into it a phrase, "We are what remembers." The chamber dimmed. The air thickened. From the walls, the carved skulls turned to face her, their eyes hollow, their mouths open, and they began to speak, all at once. Dozens of voices layered like sediment. Do you know what they buried? Do you know who fed it? They gave it names, they gave it children, they gave it promises. They made us the soil. We are not the dead, we are the price. And then, silence. Isadora looked at the jawbone again. A crack split it down the middle, and from the break, black smoke began to rise. It twisted around her wrist, climbed her arm. She didn't move. It didn't burn. It whispered, "You are the last voice. You are the unspoken word. You are the seal and the key." The smoke entered her mouth. She choked, fell to her knees. The notebook flared beside her. The pages turned so fast, they bled at the edges, then stopped. One final page, blank. And then, slowly, in script like bone, "Speak what must not be remembered, or carry it forever." Isadora could not breathe. The smoke churned inside her, threading through her lungs, curling around her spine. Her body convulsed once, twice, then fell still. A hum filled her head, not pain, understanding. She saw it, the origin, not a creature, not a god, a hunger, older than language, buried in every land, worshipped in every silence, given shape by fear and fed by forgetting. The villagers hadn't summoned it, they had shaped it, with every lie, with every burial, with every whispered agreement to look away. She saw their faces, all of them, every ancestor, who had bowed, who had offered, who had whispered that it was better this way. She saw her own bloodline kneeling. She saw her father lighting candles he never explained. She saw Rosalie placing herbs behind the door. All of them knew. And now, the thing beneath São Vicente no longer wanted worship. It wanted a voice. It wanted to speak. Through her. She rose to her feet. The jawbone pulsed in her hands. The final page glowed with waiting. She opened her mouth and said a name. Not hers. Not human. A name made of ash and bone and silence. The ossuary trembled. The skulls wept. The chamber split open beneath her, and she fell. When she woke, it was night. She lay at the edge of the old graveyard, alone. The mausoleum behind her sealed, whole. No sign of cracks, no sign of entry, only a single phrase scratched into the stone above the arch. She remembered. The village lights flickered. In the distance, and from the hills, the wind carried a different voice, her own, whispering to someone who wasn't there, saying things she hadn't yet said, and deep beneath her feet, something else repeated the name, over and over, remembering, waiting, and growing teeth. Chapter 7. Rain of Black Blood. It began with the rain, thick, slow, Black. The first drop hit the chapel roof at dawn, a single knock against rusted tin, then another and another. By the time the sun had risen, half swallowed by bruised clouds, São Vicente was slick with it. Black rain, tar-like, sour. On the tongue, it didn't bead on skin, it sank in, and with it, something woke. Isadora felt it first, not in her skin, in her teeth. A vibration, as if the rain wasn't hitting the village but humming through it. Every droplet that struck the roof, the glass, the ground, it sang. 1,000 tiny voices in a pitch too low to hear, but too deep to ignore. She stepped outside with her coat pulled tight and her hood up. It made no difference. The moment the rain touched her, her skin prickled. It slid through fabric as if it wasn't there, and her mouth filled with a taste she remembered from the pit. The taste of memory, of bone, of root. She turned to warn the others, but they were already changing. In the square, a woman stood frozen, arms raised as though to shield herself from the rain, but unmoving. Her hair clung to her cheeks in sticky ropes, her lips twitched, and then she began to speak. Not words, tones. Low, repetitive, each syllable drawn out until it trembled. Children stared up at the sky, mouths open. One began to weep black tears. Another laughed, joyless and rhythmic, until his voice cracked and his gums bled. And in the windows, those who remained hidden began to press their palms to the glass. Not from fear, from something else. A need. The rain wasn't drowning them, it was waking them up. Isadora ran, through the mud, through the sludge, through the sickness. She slipped twice, cutting her hand on gravel that had turned soft and warm like flesh. At the edge of town, the fields had begun to move. Not the stalks, the soil. Beneath the black rain, furrows cracked, open. Something beneath writhed. It wasn't the roots, it was the veins. The land itself had become skin. She turned to the hills. She had to reach the old trail, the one that led to the ruins beyond the forest. There was no more safety in São Vicente, no more prayer, only distance, and even that was thinning. Behind her, voices rose, chanting, hundreds of them, names spoken backwards, songs with no breath, a liturgy written in rot. She did not look back, because she had seen what the rain had done to the eyes. They no longer blinked, they swirled. She reached the edge of the trees as her legs gave out, collapsing beneath the gnarled limbs of an old catingueira tree. The leaves above her rattled softly, not from wind but breath. The forest was exhaling. She crawled beneath the roots, her body trembling, her fingers raw. The rain still fell, but here, under the canopy, it seemed to hang in the air, suspended like beads of ink in water. She listened, and from the village below, she heard them marching. Dozens, then hundreds. Feet dragging, flesh slapping against the earth. Voices in chorus, and rising above them all, one voice, loudest, deepest, speaking her name, Isadora. She did not answer. She opened the notebook. A new page had formed, etched in trembling lines. A map, not of São Vicente, of her bones. Her veins, her dreams, and beneath it a phrase, "It wants to wear you again." She tore the page from the notebook and burned it with a match from her coat pocket. The flames hissed black, but the rain didn't stop. Nothing stopped. Because something had breached more than the village. It had breached her, and she was beginning to remember what it felt like to be hollowed. She slept in bursts beneath the tree, and in those dreams, visions. Her mother, her father, Father Mario, the children from the school, all standing in the rain, all pointing toward her, and their mouths didn't move, but she heard them say, "We are the blood you refused. We are the feast you denied. Come home." She woke screaming, bile in her throat. The notebook now rested on her chest, open, and the only word on the page, soon. She screamed again and threw it into the woods, but it came back, an hour later, waiting beside her boots. Dry, unreadable. She knew then. The rain was never meant to flood the town. It was meant to find her, to cleanse her, to prepare her for what was coming next. She stood and walked toward the trailhead, her shadow long and twitching. Every step left a black print. The ground no longer knew how to let go, and behind her, São Vicente burned in a fire that gave no light, only smoke, only sound, only memory. She reached the ruins by dusk. They stood half swallowed by vines and ash, remnants of stone foundations and archways carved with old Latin prayers. Buildings once raised by settlers who thought they could tame the land by building churches on blood. They had failed. Now it was her turn. She moved cautiously through the broken arch. The rain followed her in. It dripped through the broken ceiling, carving black trails down the stone. The floor pulsed beneath her boots, soft, sponge-like. Moss had turned to flesh. Fungus blinked. She moved toward the altar, or what remained of it, a pile of scorched bone and rotted cloth, forming the shape of a table. The notebook pulsed. It opened to a blank page, then bled. Thick, black words appeared. Offer. She placed her hand over the page. The ink burned, the altar hissed, and something beneath it answered, a thrum, like a second heartbeat, like her own, doubled. She fell to her knees, dizzy, her thoughts splintered. She saw visions not her own. A girl, walking backward into fire. A man carving runes into his chest, a child buried alive with coins on his tongue, and beneath them all, a mouth, wide, waiting. A voice spoke from the altar, not from the notebook this time, not from the rain, from below. You are the door. Speak, bleed, feed. She looked down at her palms. Her veins were black, her breath fogged with ash, and the ground opened, revealing a staircase of ribs, descending into warmth, into memory, into hunger. She took one step, then another, and the altar closed behind her. The staircase wound downward, deeper than any structure had the right to go. Each ribbon step flexed beneath her feet like cartilage. The walls wept a dark fluid that hissed on contact with her skin. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Whatever pain she might have felt had been replaced by something else, an ache older than her name. Torches lined the descent, but they didn't burn. They pulsed, small sacks of glowing red, stitched into the wall like tumors. They beat like hearts. At the base of the stair, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. It was a cathedral of bone. Spines arched into domes, skulls lined the walls in ritual patterns, and at the center, a tree, black, twisted, growing out of a pile of jawbones, its bark split like cracked lips. Its branches moved without wind, and hanging from them, people, or what had once been people. Isadora recognized them. Neighbors, friends, Rosalie, their faces open with smiles far too wide, mouths split to the ears, eyes stitched shut. They were not dead. Their chests rose and fell. They breathed in rhythm with the tree, and as she stepped closer, their mouths whispered in unison, "You made it." The tree's trunk split open, and inside it, a throne, empty. Above it, carved in rot, a symbol she had seen in dreams, a spiral, surrounded by eyes. The notebook flew from her hands. It pinned itself to the wall, pages torn open by invisible wind. Ink sprayed across the bones, and the spiral began to turn, slowly, grind by grind, flesh tore. Voices screamed, and Isadora realized this was not the source, this was the mouth, and she was already inside. The spiral spun faster, the walls groaned, bones cracked in harmony. The people hanging from the branches began to sway, not with air but in rhythm. Their mouths opened wider, and from their throats, smoke. It filled the chamber, viscous, heavy. Each breath Isadora took dragged her closer to collapse, to forgetting, to becoming one of them. But something inside her resisted. Not strength, not courage, memory. She remembered the pit. She remembered the ossuary. She remembered the jawbone. She screamed, not from fear, from will, from defiance. And the spiral hesitated, just long enough. The tree shuddered, its bark cracked wider, and a voice spoke, not to her, but from her, her voice layered in something ancient. Enough. The spiral stopped. The room froze. Even the ink in the notebook stilled. She stepped toward the throne. The faces wept black tears, the eyes sewn shut, opened, bleeding light. She placed her hand on the armrest. The throne screamed, a sound like every dying breath ever taken, and the ground shook. The spiral split in two, and inside it, the creature. What had begun as the Chupacabra. What had warned the priest, the mother, the land. What had waited. It rose, larger now. No form, only hunger, only want. It surged toward her, but she did not move. The notebook flew open one final time, and the last page read, "The voice that ends this is yours." So she opened her mouth, and she screamed her own name. The chamber fractured, the bones exploded, the spiral unraveled, and the rain above stopped. When she opened her eyes, she was alone in a crater of ash. No notebook, no throne, no tree, only silence, only dawn. And in the sky, a clear sun, the first in weeks. Her name echoed in the wind, but it belonged to her again. And the village, distant and broken, waited for her to return, not as the girl who witnessed, but as the one who ended it. Chapter 8. The Last Light of São Vicente. The quiet after screams is never truly silence. It is the breath held between storms. The ash drifted like snow over São Vicente. Where corn once grew, there was only cracked dirt. Where the chapel stood, only scorched stone. And in the center of it all, Isadora stood alone. Not as a survivor, as a witness, as the last. She did not remember walking back. One moment, there was the pit behind her, smoldering silent. The next, the outline of the village framed by trees that no longer whispered. The doors hung open, unmanned. The windows stared like empty eyes. She passed the square. The fountain no longer flowed. The water had turned black and then dried to powder. The stones were warm beneath her feet, humming faintly, as if the land still remembered the rhythm of the spiral. And the notebook, gone, not burned, not abandoned, just finished. Its weight was still in her mind, but no longer in her hands. And for the first time, she felt the air without its voice in her ear. A silence that did not demand. A silence that allowed. She walked past her house, Rosalie's shawl still, hung on the nail. It moved slightly in the wind. She didn't take it down, she didn't go inside. She turned toward the fields, toward where the corn had once stood like soldiers. Now, the land was dry, split, burned black at the edges, but something shimmered at the far end. A shape, a single stalk, unburned, tall, green. She approached it slowly, and when she reached it, she did not touch. She knelt, bowed her head, and wept. Not from fear, from grief, because she knew this was not an end, it was a seed. The days passed in slow decay. The sky remained gray, not with storm, but with memory. No one came. The road out of São Vicente had disappeared. The forest had swallowed it, not violently but patiently, as if reclaiming what was never meant to be carved. Isadora stayed, not because she wanted to, but because she knew she had to. Each night, she walked the perimeter of the village, no spiral, no blood. But in the wind, the softest hum, and beneath her feet, she felt the earth shift slightly, breathing in silence, waiting. At dawn, she planted flowers in the square, not because they would grow, but because the land needed to remember color. The dead did not return, but neither did they rest. She felt them sometimes, watching, not cruelly, not vengefully, curiously, as if wondering why she had been spared, why the spiral had stopped turning, and every night she whispered their names, to remember them, to remind the earth, to remind herself that her voice still belonged to her, that her body was still hers, and that sometimes survival is the price you pay for saying no when everyone else said yes. One morning she woke to find footprints in the square, bare, child-sized. They circled the fountain, stopped at the flowers, traced a path to her door. She followed them outside, but no one was there, not yet. She returned inside and left the door open. That night, she dreamed of Paulo. Not lost, not twisted, just sitting in the sun, reading aloud. His voice was clear. When she woke, the shawl on the wall was gone, and beside her bed, a single petal, bright, red, alive. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, she whispered something new. Come back. If this story left a mark on you, if the whispers still echo when the world goes quiet, then subscribe, not just for more stories, but to keep the light on, to remind the dark that we remember.